So the first amp that I ever had 20 plus years ago was one of those Vox Valvetronics solid state hybrid modeling amplifiers. And it was all that I knew at the time, so I loved it. But like all technology, modeling amps have come a long way in the last 20 years. And so I was curious, how does the modern day equivalent of my student amp, my first amp 20 years ago, compare to a lot of the amps that it's modeling today? Can a $300 solid state student level amp compare to the big boys? Today's video, we're gonna find out. I got my hands on the Boss Katana 50 112 combo, and we're gonna use it to dial in 3 classic guitar tones and compare those tones to the actual amps. And we're gonna talk about sort of the thought processes and methods behind getting a $300 amp to sound like a $3,000 amp. Now, before we get started, I wanna thank Sweetwater for sponsoring today's video. I reached out to them with this idea and asked if they would send over the Katana 50, and they kindly obliged. So links to this amp, as well as some other stuff that I'll be using in today's video, are in the description box. Those will be Sweetwater affiliate links, which means if you purchase anything, I earn a small commission, which helps me keep running this channel, and I thank you. And also, if you're interested in learning more about these kind of concepts, I made a whole video course called the Amp Course a few years ago, which does a deep dive into sort of the theory behind tube amps and guitar tone and how to dial in classic guitar sounds using the amplifiers, but then also how to apply those concepts to a modeler or a modeling amp like this one. So if you're interested in today's video, I'll do a special discount for the amp course. Link is in the description. You can get 50% off if you click that link down there. Check that out if you're interested. With all that out of the way, let's mic up this little Katana and see how it sounds. Now for the actual amp, I used my hand-wired Princeton Reverb from Fender. It's mostly stock, but I do have a new old stock tube, preamp tube in the V1 slot. And that's giving it a little bit of extra gain. It makes the amp break up a little bit sooner. And you can kind of hear when I dig into the notes a little more, there's that little bit of hair on top of the notes, and that is that vintage tube. More often than not, great clean guitar tones are actually a little bit dirty. There's a little bit of distortion in there, and that can come from a number of different sources. It can come from a pedal on the floor going into the front of a very clean amp, or it can come from the amplifier itself. With the Princeton, what I was doing is pushing the volume knob to about somewhere between 5 and 6 on the input, and that still keeps the amp relatively clean, but if you listen closely, as I dig in harder, there's just an ever so slight amount of distortion and breakup. Now, the reason we want to do this is because when we're adding distortion, in this case by pushing a tube, by clipping a tube, it's also adding harmonics, it's adding richness, it's basically adding more information, more color to the sound of your guitar. And when you're recording a guitar or you're playing with a band, more often than not, you want some harmonic content. You want some distortion because that's going to help the guitar sort of step forward and cut through a little bit. So let's see if we can kind of get close with the Katana here. We're going to start with the clean setting, and I'm going to show you what I mean with this distortion thing. So this is how the amp sounds with these settings. That is like painfully clean. It's sterile. It's a little anemic. There's not much color. There's not much happening there. It doesn't sound bad by any means. It's just kind of boring. So the first thing we're going to do is get off of the clean setting. Ironically, to get the best clean sound that I have found out of this amp, we actually have to go to the pushed setting. Now, from what I've read, the pushed setting is kind of emulating a Fender black panel amp, like a deluxe reverb, which is pretty similar in a lot of ways to the Princeton that I actually used to record this. And you'll hear immediately right off the jump, this is a much better clean sound. So you can immediately hear there's like a little bit of crunch on that, just a touch. It's like very subtle. It's kind of sitting underneath everything. It's not very present, but having that little bit of distortion in there is giving us that color that's helping the guitar feel bigger, feel heavier, feel more rich. It's not as sterile or anemic as the clean setting was. Now, the next thing that I'm hearing that we need to tackle with this is the EQ. This is very, very brilliant, very sparkly, very shimmery. Part of that is the guitar. That is kind of a Jazzmaster thing. But if we listen to the Princeton, you'll notice it was bright and shimmery, but it wasn't that glassy. So the first thing I'm going to do is start by rolling off the treble. And this is something that I've talked about before. Anytime I'm working with an amplifier, especially a new amp, the first thing I'm going to do is go to the EQ section here, and I'm going to start just really drastically changing the EQ controls because I want to see what each control is doing. So let's start with the bass, start with it all the way off, and I'm just going to play the same chord over and over again. Now let's move to the mid control. That's actually impressive. That's a really active mid EQ. And now the treble. I have to say, that's actually really good. That's surprisingly good for a $300 solid state amp. So what I'm going to do is roll the bass pretty low because there wasn't much low end coming out of the Princeton. So I'm going to keep the bass low. I'm going to push some mid-range, and I'm going to roll the treble back to try and get some of that harsh glassiness out of the sound. Okay, that's much better. Now, if you notice here, I've got some pretty drastic EQ going on, and that's okay. You shouldn't be afraid to use all of the pot's sweep. Sometimes this is the sound that you want to go for. Roll the treble all the way back, push the mids, roll the bass back. It's okay. If it sounds good, it is good. The bottom line, these amps, whether they're tube driven or solid state or modelers, whatever, they have these EQ controls for a reason. Do not be afraid to use them. If I just heard that blind, I would not have guessed that this was a $300 solid state practice amp. So there you go. Okay, so next we're going to go for the classic sort of edge of breakup sound. Edge of breakup refers to when we have an amplifier set so that it is just starting to distort and break up on its own. It's on the edge of breakup. Now, the key to a great edge of breakup tone comes down to touch dynamics, how hard you're hitting the guitar. That's the whole advantage of using an edge of breakup kind of sound, is that you control how dirty or how clean the guitar is with your picking hand. So the amp I'm using as an example here is the Bad Cat Era 30. Unbelievably good sounding amplifier. It's 2 channels, and I've got both channels turned on, so they're blended with each other. And to me, this is sort of the ideal edge of breakup sound. When I dig in, the amp really starts to break up and overdrive, and it adds some nice natural compression to the notes, adding a little more sustain to the notes. But when I lighten up my picking hand, the amp gets clean and sparkly and brilliant and articulate. It's genuinely one of the best sounding amps I have. Now we can accomplish the same thing here with the Katana. To do this, I'm going to stay on the pushed setting. So these are the settings that I had from the clean sound, and you can hear it sounds really good. So to start with, I'm going to leave the EQ alone. I like how it's set, and we're going to focus on these two controls here, gain and volume. Now, to understand what's going on here, we're going to get into just some basic tube amp theory. I'm going to really simplify it here. Pretty much all tube amps, you can kind of sum into two main parts, the preamp section and the power amp section. Both of these sections have vacuum tubes in them. Preamp section is responsible for taking the very weak electric signal that's coming from your pickups and through your output jack and amplifying it initially. It takes that really, really low voltage and starts to boost it up with the vacuum tubes. Now, depending on the amp and the topology and everything, typically this is where the amp's EQ or tone stack would live. So this is where we're going to do all of our tone shaping, our EQing. And then from there, more often than not, the signal will travel from the preamp section to the power amp section. And the power amp section is to take that amplified signal, that preamplified signal, and get it up to the level necessary to go through the output transformer and drive the speaker in the cabinet. Now, you can think of these two controls here as kind of like a control for the preamp section and a control for the power amp section. If I push this gain control up, it's going to start to mimic what happens when I get preamp tube distortion. Then we go to the volume control, which is sort of similar to controlling the power amp section or like a master volume in a master volume amp, for example. And most of the time, when you think of a really great sounding overdriven amplifier, it's a combination of preamp distortion and power amp distortion, and we're going to get to that next. But for now, to dial in a good edge of breakup sound, I'm going to focus mainly on the gain control here. And what I want to do is dial in that gain control to where I start to hear the amp break up when I pick hard, and more importantly, I'm going to feel the amp start to compress under my hands. Let me show you what I mean, and then I'll explain a little more. So you see there when I'm digging in, it's breaking up a little bit, but it's not really breaking up all that much. So I'm going to bring the preamp gain up a little bit. Yeah, we're starting to get there now, so I'm going to push it a little bit more. I'm going to bring the bass down a little and add a little bit of treble. Yeah, so that to me is right where I want to be. If I pick lightly on the guitar, we have that nice sparkly kind of clean sound. It's dirty. It's not, super clean by any stretch of the imagination. But when you compare it to how overdriven it gets when I dig in, that's pretty overdriven. That's hitting the guitar super hard. And that's what I like, because in the middle of a song, on a gig, for example, I can change the amount of overdrive coming from the amplifier just by playing harder. Conversely, I can clean the amp up and make it a lot nicer sounding and prettier sounding just by picking lighter. And also, don't discount your volume and your tone control. To get this closer to that sparkly clean sound, I'm going to back off the bridge volume just like 2 notches. And then when I want it to really hit, I just... Now I can take that a step further by either adding a little more gain from the amplifier or trying out this boost circuit here, just by adding a touch of boost. And this is simulating like a boost pedal on your pedal board going into the front of the amp. Damn, that sounds not bad. So now we're past the edge of breakup, right? Like that is full on overdriven. Really overdriven. But if I just roll that volume knob back on my guitar, now I'm back in edge of breakup territory, but with more gain available. Okay, so now we're into the full-on, overdriven, classic Marshall Plexi sound. So the amp I'm playing here is the Friedman Plex 50. This is part of their vintage line, and this is essentially a clone of Dave Friedman's personal 68 50-watt Plexi with a few mods and touches to Dave's taste. Probably my second favorite Marshall amp sound that I've ever played. The first one is a vintage JTM 100 that my friend Ford owns, but that's a very expensive, very rare amplifier. But this sound is just the classic overdrive. Lots of compression, lots of saturation and distortion coming from the amplifier, but it's not too much. It's not over the top. It's not way too compressed or overdriven. Now, this is a setting that I think we'll be able to accomplish on the Katana with a little bit of work. So I've moved to the crunch setting, and I'm just going to zero out the EQ here. And according to what I've read, the crunch setting on the Katana Gen 3 is basically going after that Plexi sound, that classic Marshall big box Plexi sound. And so this is kind of where we're starting here. Everything essentially at noon. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the treble control back, really, really far back. So that's already much better. Now the next thing we want to focus on is the amount of gain that's coming from the amplifier. This is a concept that took me a really long time to learn, and it wasn't until I started recording myself consistently that I figured this out. When you're going for a heavy, distorted guitar sound, more often than not, you need to use less gain than you think. If you can go online and find isolated guitar tracks, especially for stuff like AC/DC or Led Zeppelin, a lot of the time when you hear the guitar isolated, it's much cleaner sounding than you think. It's only when the guitar gets mixed in and it's double tracked or triple tracked and it's combined with the drums and the bass, that's where the weight comes from. That's where that big, heavy, classic crunch guitar sound comes from. It's how it fits in the mix overall. But when we're playing at home in our room by ourselves, the temptation is to do this, like just drive the gain all the way up and go to town. What's happening there is the amp is really starting to kind of fall apart, especially in the low end. The low end's getting really muddy. It's really compressed. So instead, what I'm going to do is roll that preamp gain back, and I'm going to push the volume up a little bit, and I'm going to try and strike a balance of nice saturation with enough compression without the amp starting to fall apart. So we'll just kind of roll into it here. I'll start with the gain relatively low. It's actually pretty nice sound. Add a little bit more gain. Okay, that's better. The other thing I'm noticing is I want a little less bass. It's just getting a little muddy. You have to keep in mind here, we're working with a really budget amplifier, and part of the budget amplifier is a very, very budget speaker. In fact, a lot of the harshness and the bad frequencies that I'm trying to work around here, I think are actually coming from the speaker instead of the amp itself. And so one of the ways I'm going to work around that is just pulling some of those frequencies out that I don't want. And on the other side of that, I want a little bit more mid-range because I'm playing a single coil guitar. I want a little more sort of kick. To be honest, I've never actually played a Katana before making this video, and I picked the least expensive one, at least that Sweetwater had at the time of filming this, and it's really good, man. It almost makes me jealous of people that are learning now. Like, if you got this as your first amp, or one of your first amps and you're learning, like, you're doing pretty good, man. And hopefully, as you saw in this video, with a little bit of knowledge and understanding how tube amps work and how some of these concepts like EQ, gain staging, and compression all work, you can get some really great sounds out of a really affordable, solid state practice amp. So yeah, color me impressed. I like it. Like I said, if you want more information about the Katana series, I'll have some links in the description box down below. Those will be Sweetwater affiliate links. And once again, I thank Sweetwater for sponsoring this video. Don't forget, you can get 50% off of the AMP course, which is my video course dedicated to these concepts and more. If you liked this video, you'll probably really dig that course. So check it out if you're interested. If not, I appreciate you watching till the end. My name is Rhett Shull. Please subscribe while you're down there, and I will see you real soon on the next one.